Ebusuafo yɛbɛma obi bia akɔ abasronko so de aba Ghana Politics Avenue so yɛbɛsrɛ obi bia sɛ afei ɛno wabɛdwumadi kɛseɛ wei so a like dwumadi no share subscribe to the channel no sɛnea yɛbɛyɛ political trending news deɛ ɛkɔ ɛne deɛ ɛbɛbia Ghana Politics Avenue so agyepɛde sɛ ɔdebɛbrɛ mu wabadwafoɔ ɛne natiefoɔ na ɛnɛ obi bɛka sɛ yɛkɔ political highway no so no nsɛm bɛyɛ ne aso akɔte like dwumadi no share subscribe to the channel no sɛnea yɛbɛyɛ political trending news bi a ɛkɔ ɛbɛbia no yɛde tuma wɔn so nsa bitima ka bi bɔ notification bell no so adɔma no fa wɔn nsa bɔ so sɛnea yɛbɛyɛ political trending news na enso from crown on sabiti maka mo wiem ho na so watie de ekọ ene de heba na ekọ political highway no so na yensem bebre ene yaso akọ nsem ni beni say eye ekuoku a enim so oye chairman Wontumi Akonta man no na eye omo manager se chairman Wontumi de ho ono ene na hwe de ekọ ene de ebe bia so no ono aba be pansan nsem e wo court na akoye awawasem yi pa ye achirem biem say ono na chese 9 months for ekọ akostope galamsey e wo Akonta man en for galamsey no omo kwa akostope okọ gada boys omo tugu na man for so omo pata pam omo free galamsey site ho a obiya team anstop omo time na NPP e wo power no ene wa back court aba be kan zembi ehu ye pa o achirem biem say one chairman Wontumi eye adwuma no ade a ye frɛ ne nkrata asem ana paper sem ana documents sem ana se ade a yede pen paper ne pen eye no de chairman Wontumi no onye bi da ono oye manager ohun se chairman Wontumi kra sign bi da na mibusa mo ho se eba galamsey site ho na chairman Wontumi nkrata asem ne paper sem no onye ho ana se onfa krata asem ne paper sem onye adwuma eye dan no timi koje sa site no e de ye adwuma ye busa eye ekoko no so ono so kirem se ne master ewo nkrata na we amana ye na department na right now no we busa mo say okoko dey na push wa and dey o ka no kre all because we who say wan ka no kra one ne master chairman Wontumi ebetumi akojel for 15 good years na busa for enyame na make okoko na na abie na no maka since I have known chairman Wontumi he doesn't issue or work with documents and his defense have been that he is not an academic the oka ni na say chairman Wontumi enye obi a wako school chairman Wontumi enye obi a onimade chairman Wontumi enye obi a ono onimhwe enti de oya na se ono de onya kan waka na obe make sure so be man ko fon so be go na se de e ko de be bia Wontumi enso enwia ne sika nsensem na se akoya wa wansem yi pa o abusia for me pese me se mo mbra mo yonko ni gutie nsem course
% of the available workforce, a shortfall Gospel warns is insufficient in addressing the critical staffing gap in Ghana's public health institutions. The association also raised procedural concerns, including a lack of transparency regarding regional slot allocations, persistent technical issues with the application portal, and limited stakeholder engagement in the design and execution of the recruitment process. Gospel emphasized that these shortcomings could prevent qualified candidates from securing positions within the government space. Gauge Dr. Emmanuel Owusu-Wiafe, who is the national chairman of the Government and Hospital Pharmacists Association, Gospel, has joined us via Zoom this afternoon. Doc, I appreciate you speaking to us. We know that the ministry has explained why the low numbers are being recruited. Is it a case that you're not satisfied with the explanation because it's an issue of funding being available?
Okay, good afternoon and thank you so much for having me. The fundamental issues you are raising has first and foremost gotten to do with the fact that since 2019, there hasn't been wholesale recruitment of pharmacists. Yes, we do appreciate the efforts by this current government and the Ministry of Health to recruit our cadres. But the point remains, as we have indicated, if more than 4,000 pharmacists are cleared and 6,000 plus pharmacy technicians are verified, then we expected that more of our cadres will be appropriately recruited. And the point is a basis of, if you look at the data, there are some cadres, across the divide who have the privilege of being recruited every year to fill in the gaps, and if you look at the less than 3% of our current workforce being given the nod, that is indeed woefully inadequate. We actually expected government to improve on the numbers, especially considering the myriad of promises that has been given us previously by the government.
I reckon there's the appreciation as well of the difficulty, because not just within the health front, across the length and breadth where government is expected to be recruiting, there's been challenges in being able to absorb the numbers. In the past, we've seen, particularly for nurses, an instance of being bonded, hence they can go only to government institutions. Is it the case with these pharmacists as well, and then pharmacy technicians, that you can only work within government institutions, hence the continuous wait?
That is not exactly the case. I mean, beside it, if an individual trains as a healthcare professional, the ultimate aim is to provide healthcare services irrespective of the facility you work. But government is the mainstay for employment. And the fact remains that, despite there are very few opportunities actually outside the public service for the pharmaceutical workforce to be recruited. And that is the very point. From 2019 till now, there are a number of pharmacists, number of pharmacy technicians waiting to be recruited. It's yes, we understand the fact that particularly for some cadres, there has been more consistent recruitment. And that is the very reason why we expected that, barring the fact that for over 5 years there hasn't been recruitment, at least it would have been fair to give us more opportunities, and not the 100 pharmacists and 150 pharmacists we have come to know.
What would have been a number that is appreciable to GOSPA for both?
Well, at least for the records, we had the privilege of the sector minister, looking at recruiting 1,621 of pharmacists, and then more of the pharmacy technicians as such. And so if there was clearance for 8,000 health cadres, we expected an increase. Something around 700 to 1,000 of our workforce for the first tranche of recruitment would have been better than not the numbers we are currently working with.
Lastly, on the concerns you raise about the recruitment process, what exactly are the challenges you say has bedeviled this process, for which reason you're making the claim it won't be fair in terms of how persons are recruited?
Okay, so if government is recruiting, we are looking at equal opportunity, especially as all these individuals willing to work with the public service are equally qualified. We experienced the instance where a number of colleagues could just not go through the system. There were there were times when the website, hosting the recruitment actually went down. A number of people could not log in, they could not complete the application process. And when that happens, of course, it places some groups at a disadvantage. And then the other factor has gotten to do with the fact that the ministry, unfortunately, could not publish the numbers. They are currently recruiting nurses, and they are having the privilege of at least knowing how many nurses and midwives the Ghana Health Service, CHAC, and then the Ahmadiyya missions will recruit. We didn't have that privilege. And so when somebody is even eventually able to log in, he or she doesn't have anything to actually work with. And when that happens, of course, it creates unfairness and then disadvantage to some of our members.
Right, Doc, we'll leave it here. I'm sure there can be the forum for further engagement and conversations as well as to what should happen with pharmacists and the etc. But perhaps I'll ask one more of you, just briefly, as to what will be your expectation going forward to address this? Because on the side of government, they continue to raise a challenge as to financing, and you say opportunities as well are not available outside of government employment. What should be the way forward to address this?
Okay, so first and foremost, we've indicated our members are willing to serve even in the most, deprived regions across the country. we expect, especially barring that 6 years there hasn't been government recruitment, there should be an appreciation in the numbers. We can work with something around 800 to 1,000 of the pharmacy workforce, and then we want the numbers to be published so that at least our membership can have the benefit of which numbers are located to which of the regions and then the districts. And then we want better engagement with our directors so they also know, what is happening, pertaining to this recruitment drive.
Absolutely, Doc. I appreciate you speaking to us this afternoon. Doc is the chairman of GOPSA, who are asking for a bit more in terms of the numbers of persons who are being recruited by the health ministry.
28 Ghanaians, mostly young people who fell victim to a human trafficking syndicate in La Côte d'Ivoire, have been rescued and repatriated home following a joint security operation involving Ghanaian officials and Ivorian authorities. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs says the question was carried out by security operatives together with officials from Ghana's embassy in Abidjan, leading to the safe return of the victims to Ghana on May 10th. The rescued persons are currently assisting investigators as authorities work to uncover the full extent of the trafficking network. Government has praised authorities in La Côte d'Ivoire for what it describes as effective collaboration and intelligence sharing that made the operation successful. Officials say efforts are underway to dismantle the criminal syndicate and ensure that those behind the trafficking scheme are arrested and prosecuted. The ministry is meanwhile urging Ghanaians to remain vigilant and avoid falling prey to fraudulent travel and employment offers, particularly from unlicensed recruitment agencies. The public is being encouraged to verify all overseas job and travel opportunities with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of Labour, Jobs and Employment Relations, as well as Ghana's diplomatic missions abroad. We'll have a quick chat on the back of that. James Kofi Annan is an executive director of Challenging Heights. He's joined us for a brief period on this. James, good afternoon to you. I appreciate your time this afternoon. But how would you rate the Foreign Ministry's handling of this case?
I think, good afternoon. I think there's some noise. Unfortunately, I did not hear the question.
Very well, I'll try again. I'm asking how you rate the Foreign Ministry's work on this case.
Well, I would say I would like to congratulate the ministry, especially the multi-sectoral nature of the collaboration for the rescue of these victims. This is what every country's government must behave when your citizens are trapped elsewhere in another country. Make efforts and take steps in addressing their needs. So I would like to congratulate the ministry for work well done. The other question that needs to be asked is, so what next? Now that these victims are back to Ghana, number one, how are we meeting their needs? And when I say needs, I'm talking about the psychological trauma that they have gone through. How are we addressing it? And then the loss of livelihood as a result of this trafficking syndicate. How are we addressing it? These are questions that need to be answered as they have arrived back in Ghana.
And what would be your recommendations on how to address this?
Well, the human trafficking law addresses it by default, except that we are not implementing the law well. If you look at the Human Trafficking Act, there's supposed to be a fund, and that fund must address these things whenever somebody becomes a victim of human trafficking. It is a fund that must address the district that the person has gone through. Unfortunately, we don't have money in the fund. And I have kept on asking government, especially through the budgetary allocations, to allocate a certain amount, at least 20 million Ghana cedis into the human trafficking fund, so that whenever people find themselves in such a situation, they don't become destitute in their own country. Because remember, most of these victims might have paid heavy amount of money to connection people and be duped. So So returning to Ghana, they don't have employment. They may not have employment. They may not have any source of income, and they are traumatized. There must be the need for us as a state or as a nation to support them in one way or the other until they have found their foot back and are able to live independent life.
I see. And obviously, the lack of money in that fund is a very important subject matter that you have raised. But would you consider it our most challenging issue in tackling human trafficking or trafficking of this nature or in any form at all as a country?
Well, let me put it in two perspectives. So the first perspective is the one that we are dealing with. When people want to travel at all costs, I have made the statement that, look, if you don't have any very, very important thing to do outside, if you're not going for tourism, you have no money, you want to go and enjoy and come, don't travel. If you don't have employment, if somebody has not given you employment contract to come and work, don't go. Because you see, if you are not employed in your own country, don't expect to gain employment in another country so quickly. The factors that are preventing you from being employed in your own country would also prevent you from being employed in another country. And most of these employment syndicates, overseas employment syndicates, most of them are just looking for their money. So they prey on the vulnerabilities of people who don't have employment, who then go and seek loans. Some even have their families selling their land, selling their properties, just to give it to them, to give it to these connection people, with the hope that once they travel, they get money and come back. But it is not so. I have traveled all over the world, and I know that that notion of when I travel, I'll get money and come is not true. So we must be vigilant, and I agree with the statement that the ministry released, that we must be vigilant and verify all promises of employment overseas. The second aspect of the challenge has to do with poverty and vulnerability, and that has to do with local trafficking, especially girls and children who are trafficked to fishing communities, farming communities, mining communities, and they are used for certain inhuman activities because families have been promised that when they go, either they are sending them to school or they are going to trade them in apprenticeship or they will bring money home. These are all
24 million cedis as well in terms of monies to be paid to farmers, unpaid crop deliveries and devastating rural livelihoods as a result of that. What we know, and this is what I was talking to you about, that in March of this year, that news broke about possible asset seizure by some banks, a number of the consortiums ordered to sell their assets, amongst many other things, because of that 257 million debts owed them. But comes the big question as to what must happen in relation to all of the things that we're seeing play out. That's a situation as we have it. Thomas A.C. Kuma is the Deputy Managing Director of the PBC in charge of finance. We're working the phone lines to connect with him because outside of this is the big question as to whether or not that promise and that announcement by the finance minister somewhere this year, where we understand that the remaining beans were to be purchased by the PBC, has that been honored? And has there been the commitment on the part of government to revive PBC in relation to all of the details that we've been bringing to you? And so this is what we know is a situation in relation to the produce buying company. What we understand is that Cocoa Board says that there is no such in terms of non-payment due PBC to be handed over to cocoa farmers. From our checks, that's the indication we get. But what is the situation in relation to PBC and the managers, persons who are in charge of the facility, expected to be producing or to be buying rather 50% of all of our raw beans in the next farming season, which were, if we're not already in, which we should be getting into, is a big conversation and the big question that we're seeking to ask here for you this afternoon here on News Central. But as we work to connect with him, we know that of the many things that we've been walking you through this afternoon as well has to do with asset freezes.
I mean, she'll be our Jibril heard my dear bedroom pepper, so you'll be a sick. Ghana politics, the yen, Neko Fade Monte at the Bremo, dear Maswati, Nede Masonte, then Nayan, the Bremo, more monetary like Jumedi and share subscribe to the channel. So that they are political trending news, there, co any day baby and Ghana politics are Japanese or the Bremo, Nabeda for any for her, and I'm rare, Mam Quine set me in fact, Monsi, my crowd will be